welcome to a story of love that changed everything. The universe, Dr. Elara Vance had long ago concluded, was infinitely more reliable than people. It operated on a set of unbreakable laws, a celestial symphony of physics and mathematics that played out across billions of years. Stars were born, they lived, and they died in predictable, awe-inspiring cycles. People, on the other hand, were messy, unpredictable, and prone to supernova-sized emotional outbursts with little to no warning. Which was why she preferred the stars. Here, at the Starlight Ridge Observatory, perched atop a mountain that clawed at the heavens, she was as close to them as she could get. The air was thin and sharp, smelling of pine and cold stone, and the silence was a physical presence. It was a silence that allowed you to hear the whisper of the solar wind, or at least imagine you could. Inside the dome, the only sounds were the low hum of the cooling systems for the primary telescope and the soft, rhythmic clicks of her keyboard as she processed the latest data array from a distant nebula. Tonight, the data was beautiful. She was tracking the spectral signature of a protostar, a stellar nursery where new suns were coalescing from cosmic dust and gas. The lines on her screen were a language she understood better than any spoken tongue, a story of hydrogen, helium, and the faint, tantalizing traces of complex organic molecules, the building blocks of life, floating in a cloud trillions of miles away. It was a discovery that made the hairs on her arms stand up. It was profound. It was orderly. A sudden flash of light from outside, piercing the filtered darkness of the control room, broke her concentration. Elara flinched, her focus shattering like a dropped lens. She scowled and pushed her chair back, the worn casters groaning in protest. It happened again. A brief, obnoxious bloom of white light against the observatory's pristine, dark sky perimeter. "For the love of Hubble," she muttered, running a hand through her already dishevelled dark hair. She had it tied back in a loose knot, but rebellious strands always managed to escape, framing a face that was more often illuminated by monitor glow than sunlight. She knew what it was. Tourists. Or, more specifically, one of the so-called starlight photography tours that had become popular in the valley below. They promised city dwellers a chance to capture the Milky Way, but more often than not, they just captured their own incompetence with flash photography, polluting the very darkness they had come to admire. The observatory had a strict agreement with the local guide companies about light discipline, an agreement that was clearly being violated. Normally her colleague, Dr. Ben Carter, would handle this sort of thing. Ben was the diplomat, the affable face of the observatory who could gently admonish people without making them feel like cosmic dunces. But Ben was down with a nasty cold, leaving Elara as the sole guardian of the ridge tonight. Elara Vance was not, by nature, a diplomat. With a sigh that condensed in the chilly air of the control room, she grabbed a heavy jacket and headed for the exit. The thick metal door opened with a hiss of decompressed air, and the cold hit her with the force of a physical blow. The temperature outside had dropped significantly, and the vast star-dusted sky was a breathtaking canopy of diamond dust on black velvet. It was a sight that never failed to humble her, to remind her of her own infinitesimal place in the grand scheme. But tonight, that feeling was tainted by irritation. She followed the crunch of her boots on the gravel path that wound around the base of the dome. About 100 yards away, on a public scenic overlook, she saw them. A group of about 10 people, bundled in winter gear, was gathered around a man who was pointing at the sky. A few tripods were set up, their cameras aimed at the heavens. As she watched, another phone flashlight cut a swath through the darkness. Her jaw tightened. She strode toward them, her footsteps loud in the immense quiet of the mountain. As she got closer, she could hear the man's voice, a low, calm baritone that carried easily on the still air. And if you look just to the left of Jupiter, you will see the constellation Lyra. The brightest star there is Vega. In about 14,000 years, because of the Earth's wobble, Vega will actually become our North Star. Elara stopped, just at the edge of their group. The man was tall, with broad shoulders that were apparent even under his thick coat. He had a dark, well-trimmed beard, and his eyes, what she could see of them in the faint starlight, seemed to crinkle at the corners as he spoke. He had an easy confidence, a way of holding the space that made everyone listen. He was using a dim red light pointer, which was acceptable, but the members of his group were the problem. "Excuse me," Elara said, her voice sharper than she intended. The man, Liam, turned toward her. His calm lecture was interrupted. The group murmured, turning as one to look at the woman who had appeared out of the darkness. In the faint red glow from his pointer, his expression was one of mild surprise. "Can I help you?" he asked, his voice even. "I am Dr. Vance from the observatory," she stated, crossing her arms as much for warmth as for effect. "We have a very strict dark sky policy up here. Your group's flashlights are causing significant light pollution. We are in the middle of a critical data collection period, and every stray photon can corrupt our readings." Liam's easy smile did not falter, but a flicker of something, annoyance perhaps, passed through his eyes. "We are aware of the policy, Doctor. I instructed my group to use red lights only, to preserve night vision and minimize interference." He gestured with his own dim pointer. "Some people just forget." He turned to his group. "Folks, a friendly reminder. White lights off, please. We need to respect the important work being done up here on the hill. We are guests in their laboratory." A few people sheepishly clicked off their phones. But Elara was not satisfied. "It should not have to be a reminder," she pressed on, the frustration of her interrupted work bubbling over. "This is a professional research facility, not a tourist playground. The data we are collecting is infinitely more important than a few blurry photos of the Milky Way." The words hung in the cold air, colder than the temperature. The tourists shifted uncomfortably. Liam's smile finally faded, replaced by a level, steady gaze. He took a step toward her, closing the distance between them. He was even taller up close. "I understand your work is important, Dr. Vance," he said, his voice still low but now with a firm edge. "But my work is important to these people. For most of them, this is the first time they have ever seen the sky without city lights. For them, this is a connection to something they have lost. It is not just about blurry photos. It is about wonder." Elara felt a prickle of something she did not want to acknowledge. He was not just a tour guide. He was an advocate for the sky, just in a different way. But she could not back down now. Wonder does not pay the bills for a multi-million-dollar telescope. He let out a short, humorless laugh. "No, I suppose it does not." He looked from her back to his group, who were now watching the exchange with rapt attention. "All right, everyone, let us take a 10-minute break. Try to capture some long exposures. Remember the settings we talked about. And please, no more white light." As his group dispersed to their cameras, he turned his full attention back to Elara. "Look, I apologize for my clients. I will be more vigilant. Is your data corrupted beyond repair?" The question was direct and devoid of the sarcasm she had expected. She hesitated. "No, not beyond repair. But it requires me to scrub the affected data frames, which is time-consuming and tedious." "I see." He shoved his hands into his pockets and looked up at the sky. "What are you looking at tonight that is so critical?" The question caught her off guard. Most people, when faced with her job title, either nodded blankly or made a bad joke about aliens. They rarely asked for specifics. "A protostar in the Eagle Nebula," she said, the words coming out automatically. "We are analyzing its chemical composition." He nodded slowly, his gaze fixed on the heavens. "The pillars of creation. I have a print of the Hubble image hanging in my office. It is incredible. It looks like a cosmic cathedral." Elara blinked. He knew what she was talking about. He was not just looking at the sky, he was seeing it. "Most people do not know its name," she admitted, her tone softening slightly. "Most people do not have a reason to," he replied, finally looking back at her. His eyes had adjusted to the dark, and she could see they were a warm hazel colour. "I am a photographer. It is my job to know the names of beautiful things." The compliment was so matter-of-fact, so devoid of flirtation, that it disarmed her completely. She found herself at a loss for words. He gestured toward her jacket. "You are shivering. You should go back inside." "I am fine," she said, though her teeth were beginning to chatter. She had not realized how cold she had gotten. "You are not. You are a scientist. You should appreciate the data. Your body is telling you its core temperature is dropping." He gave her a small, wry smile. "Go on. I will keep my stargazers in line. I promise." There was a sincerity in his voice that made it hard to argue. With a curt nod, she turned to leave. But as she took a step, her boot caught on an exposed tree root she had not seen in the dark. She stumbled, pinwheeling her arms for balance, and a small, heavy object flew out of her jacket pocket. It landed with a sickening crack on a nearby rock. "Damn it!" Elara cried out, kneeling down immediately. It was her portable spectroscope calibrator, a custom-built piece of equipment, delicate and absolutely essential for ensuring the readings on the main telescope were accurate. The casing was cracked, and a small green light that should have been blinking steadily was now dark. Liam was beside her in an instant. "What is it? Are you okay?" "I am fine, but this is not," she said, her voice tight with panic. She tried to pry the casing open with her numb fingers, but it was jammed. "The backup is in the city. I cannot get a new one until morning at the earliest." Tonight's observation window is gone. The frustration and disappointment were a bitter taste in her mouth. She had been tracking this protostar for weeks, waiting for this specific alignment. Now, because of a stupid flashlight and her own clumsiness, it was all for nothing. "Let me see," Liam said gently. She looked up at him, ready to tell him to back off, that he could not possibly understand. but his expression was one of genuine concern. He held out a hand. Reluctantly, she passed him the damaged device. He pulled a small multi-tool from his pocket, the kind a practical, outdoorsy person would carry. With a surprising deftness, he used a small lever to carefully pry the cracked casing open without causing more damage. Inside, a mess of fine wires and circuit boards was visible. "I used to do camera repair," he said, his voice a low murmur as he examined the interior. These little electronics are all pretty similar. It is usually a loose connection. He tilted the device, and a tiny wire, which had clearly snapped off its soldering point, came loose. "Ah, there is your problem." Elara stared at the broken wire. It was such a small point of failure for such a catastrophic problem. "It is no use. I do not have a soldering iron up here." Liam did not answer right away. He was still studying the device. Then he looked up, a thoughtful expression on his face. "Maybe you do not need one." He went to his large camera bag, which was resting near one of the tripods. He rummaged inside for a moment before producing a small, portable battery pack for charging his gear and a strange-looking attachment with 2 alligator clips. "What is that?" Elara asked. "It is a portable power bank, but I rigged it with a step-up converter and a filament wire. It is a makeshift dew heater. I wrap it around my camera lens on damp nights to keep it from fogging up. It gets just hot enough to..." He paused, focusing intently. He carefully stripped a tiny bit of the broken wire with the multi-tool's pliers, then held it in place against the soldering point. He touched the filament tip to the connection. There was a tiny puff of smoke and the smell of hot metal. He held it there for a second, then 2, before pulling it away. The wire was fused to the contact point. It was not a clean weld, but it looked solid. He carefully closed the casing, which clicked shut. He pressed the power button. The small green light flickered once, twice, and then began to blink with a steady, reassuring pulse. Elara stared at the blinking light, then at him. She was speechless. He had just saved her entire night of research with a camera battery and a piece of wire. He had fixed a complex scientific instrument with the ingenuity of a backwoods mechanic. He handed the calibrator back to her, a hint of a proud smile on his face. "Give that a try, Dr. Vance." She took it, her fingers brushing his. His hand was warm and steady. "How did you?" "Like I said, I fix things," he said simply. "Cameras, camping stoves, scientific gizmos that get dropped in the dark. It is all just figuring out how the pieces are supposed to fit together." She looked down at the device in her hand, then back up at him. The irritation she had felt earlier had completely evaporated, replaced by a confusing mix of gratitude and astonishment. Thank you. You did not have to do that." "I know," he said, but it seemed a shame to let a whole nebula go to waste. He looked over his shoulder at his group, who were quietly taking their photos. "And I felt bad about the flashlights." "My name is Elara," she said, the formality of her title suddenly feeling ridiculous. He smiled, a genuine, warm smile that reached his eyes. "Liam Caldwell. It is nice to meet you properly, Elara." An unfamiliar warmth spread through her chest, having nothing to do with the jacket she was wearing. It was the warmth of a connection, a small, unexpected spark in the cold, vast darkness. She, who spent her life looking for flickers of light millions of light years away, had found one right here on her mountain. I should get back, she said, clutching the calibrator. I still have time to salvage the observation window. Of course, Liam said, stepping back to give her space. Go look at your baby star. She started to walk away, then paused and looked back at him. He was watching her, his hands back in his pockets, a silhouette against the star-dusted horizon. He was not just a guide. He was a photographer, a tinkerer, a man who spoke of wonder and knew the names of beautiful things. He was unpredictable and illogical, and he had just fixed the unfixable. Liam, she called out, her voice softer now. He tilted his head. Yeah? The tour. When it is over, would you like to see it? The protostar, through the main scope. The offer surprised her as much as it did him. She never invited anyone into her workspace. It was her sanctuary. But the words had come out before she could stop them. Liam's smile returned, wider this time. It was a sight almost as breathtaking as the nebula itself. I would like that very much, Elara. As she walked back to the dome, the cold no longer seemed to bite so deeply. The rhythmic blinking of the green light in her hand felt like a new and unfamiliar heartbeat. The universe was still a place of order and predictability, but she was beginning to suspect that the most interesting discoveries might be found in the messy, chaotic, and utterly unpredictable spaces much closer to home. Back in the sterile sanctuary of the control room, Elara found that the universe had subtly tilted on its axis. The data streaming onto her monitors was the same. The spectral lines of the protostar just as crisp and beautiful as before. The low hum of the machinery was the same steady, reassuring note it always was. But she was different. The silence, once a comfortable blanket, now seemed to be filled with a quiet anticipation. It was waiting for something. She was waiting for someone. She successfully recalibrated the spectroscope, the small device now blinking its cheerful green light on her console like a tiny miraculous beacon. Liam's handiwork was solid. She ran the diagnostic, and the readings were perfect. She managed to capture the last hour of the optimal observation window, salvaging the night's work from the brink of disaster. The relief was immense. A wave that should have left her feeling victorious and ready to lose herself in the numbers. Instead, her mind kept drifting. She found herself replaying their conversation. His easy confidence, the way he spoke about wonder, the unexpected knowledge he possessed. He was not the arrogant amateur she had initially pegged him for. He was something else entirely, a variable she had not accounted for. And then there was the memory of his hands, strong, capable hands that had gently taken her broken equipment and, with an almost impossible ingenuity, made it whole again. A soft knock on the control room door made her jump. Her heart gave a sudden, illogical lurch. She smoothed down her sweater, a useless gesture in the dimly lit room, and ran a quick hand over her hair, trying to tame the errant strands. Why did she suddenly care what she looked like? She was a scientist in her natural habitat. That should be enough. Come in, she called out, her voice steadier than she felt. The door opened and Liam stepped inside, bringing a gust of cold, pine-scented air with him. He had taken off his heavy outer coat and was now in a dark Henley shirt that stretched across his broad shoulders. He held a large insulated travel mug in one hand. His tour group was gone. The mountain was quiet again, except for the two of them. My stargazers are safely on their way back down the mountain, dreaming of Andromeda, he said, his voice a low rumble in the enclosed space. I hope I am not too late. No, not at all, Elara said, gesturing to the chair beside her console. I just finished the data capture. You are just in time. He gave her a slow smile and walked over, his presence seeming to fill the small room. He moved with a quiet grace that was surprising for a man his size. He placed the large mug on her desk. I brought you something. It is a peace offering for my group's earlier transgressions against science. She looked at the mug. What is it? The best hot chocolate in the valley, he said. Made by a woman named Maria at the little diner just off the main road. The secret is a pinch of cinnamon and a dash of cayenne pepper. It will warm you up from the inside out. Elara stared at the offering. No one ever brought her things at the observatory, other than Ben occasionally bringing in a box of stale donuts. The gesture was thoughtful, personal, and it threw her completely off balance. Thank you, she said, her voice barely a whisper. She wrapped her cold hands around the mug. The warmth seeped into her fingers, a pleasant, comforting sensation. So this is the brain of the operation, Liam said, looking around the room at the banks of monitors, the blinking lights, the complex wiring neatly tied into bundles along the walls. It is less chaotic than I imagined. Elara could not help but smile. I like order. Chaos is for quantum mechanics. And people, he added, a playful glint in his eye. And people, she conceded. She took a sip of the hot chocolate. It was incredible. A slow, gentle heat from the cayenne bloomed at the back of her throat, a perfect counterpoint to the rich, sweet chocolate. This is really good. Maria is a genius, he said, leaning against the edge of the desk, his proximity creating a subtle charge in the air. So, am I still invited to see this famous baby star? The offer still stands, she confirmed, feeling a flutter of nervousness. Sharing her data was one thing. Sharing the experience of the telescope itself felt far more intimate. Follow me. She led him out of the control room and up a narrow, winding metal staircase that spiraled up into the heart of the dome. The air grew colder with every step. The only light came from dim safety lamps spaced far apart on the walls. When they reached the top, she pushed open a heavy door, and they stepped onto the observation floor. The space was cavernous and cathedral-like, the entire domed roof soaring high above them. And in the center, dominating everything, was the telescope. It was a magnificent instrument, a massive white tube of precision-engineered steel and glass, balanced on an intricate equatorial mount. It was pointed up at the open slit in the dome, a silent, unblinking eye aimed at the cosmos. Liam let out a low whistle. He was completely still, his head tilted back, taking in the sheer scale of the machine. He was not just looking at it. He was drinking it in. Wow, he breathed, the word a cloud of vapor in the frigid air. Photos do not do it justice, not even a little bit. His reverence was so genuine, so palpable, that Elara felt a swell of pride. She is a 2-meter Ritchie-Chrétien reflector, she said, her voice echoing slightly in the vast space. Custom-built optics. The primary mirror weighs nearly a ton and is polished to a tolerance of less than a wavelength of light. She, Liam asked, turning to her with a curious smile. Elara felt a faint blush creep up her neck. I call her Vera, she admitted, after Vera Rubin, the astronomer who discovered the evidence for dark matter. Vera, Liam repeated, nodding in approval as he walked slowly around the base of the massive instrument, running a hand lightly over its cold, painted surface. It fits. Tome. Home. She is a grand old lady. Elara moved to a smaller control panel near the eyepiece assembly. The main imaging is done with a charge-coupled device camera, cooled with liquid nitrogen. But there is still an optical eyepiece for direct observation and alignment. She typed a series of commands into the keypad. With a nearly silent hum, the massive telescope made a minute adjustment, its motors whispering as it tracked its celestial target. Okay, she is locked on. She gestured toward the eyepiece. Have a look. Liam approached the eyepiece with a careful, deliberate step, as if he were approaching a wild animal. He leaned forward, one eye closed, and looked through the lens. For a long moment he was completely silent. Elara watched him, her own breath held in her chest. She had seen this sight 1,000 times, but seeing it through his eyes felt new. She was sharing a piece of her soul. Finally he pulled back, his eyes wide with an emotion she could not quite name. It was awe, but deeper. It was a profound, soul-shaking wonder. My God, he said, his voice hushed. It is not just a smudge of light. It is a cloud. It is glowing from the inside. And the colors, that is the hydrogen gas, ionized by the intense radiation from the young stars forming within, she explained, her voice taking on the familiar cadence of a lecture, a comfortable space for her to retreat to. The different colors correspond to different elements: red for hydrogen, green for oxygen, blue for sulfur. It is like a painter's canvas, he murmured, leaning in for another look. It is alive. She smiled. In a way, it is. It is a stellar nursery. The pillars of creation are just a small part of it. You are watching the birth of suns, Liam. The light you are seeing left that nebula about 7,000 years ago. It has been traveling through space all that time, just to land in your eye tonight. He straightened up and looked at her, his hazel eyes seeming to glow in the dim light. You get to see this every night. It was not a question, it was a statement of profound envy and respect. On the clear nights, she said, it never gets old. I can see why, he said. They stood in a comfortable silence for a moment, the quiet hum of the telescope the only sound. It makes you feel incredibly small and incredibly connected, she added. Every atom in our bodies was forged in the heart of a star like one of those. We are literally made of stardust. He was looking at her now, not the telescope. His gaze was intense and curious. You talk about it like a poet. I am a scientist, she corrected automatically. Can you not be both? He asked. The question hung in the air between them. It was a challenge to the neat, orderly boxes she had put herself and the world into. She had no answer for him. Why photography? She asked, changing the subject. You said you used to repair cameras. What made you switch from the inside to the outside? He leaned against the railing that encircled the telescope platform, looking out at the sliver of night sky visible through the dome's opening. Repairing them was a puzzle. I liked that. Taking them apart, figuring out the problem, putting them back together. It was logical. It made sense. But I was always fixing the tool, not using it. He paused, gathering his thoughts. One day, A guy brought in an old film camera. It had been his father's. The shutter was jammed, and he wanted me to see if I could save it. Inside, there was still a roll of film. I managed to get it working, and out of curiosity, I developed the film. The photos were from a family trip to the Grand Canyon, taken 20 years earlier. They were imperfect, a little blurry, some light leaks, but they were full of life. His dad, his mum, him as a little kid with a goofy grin. It was a moment of their lives, captured forever on a piece of celluloid. He looked back at Elara. I realized then that I did not want to be the guy who just fixes the machine that captures the light. I wanted to be the one who captures it. I wanted to tell stories with it. His story resonated with her in a way she did not expect. He was talking about capturing moments in time, just as she was. He used film and sensors. She used spectrographs and charge-coupled devices. But the impulse was the same. The desire to see, to understand, to preserve a fleeting piece of the universe. "So you started the tours?" she asked. "Eventually," he nodded. "I moved out here from the city 5 years ago to get away from the light pollution. I wanted to photograph the stars. But I found that I missed people more than I thought I would. I realized that most people have never really seen the night sky. They live their whole lives under a veil of artificial light. The tours are my way of pulling that veil back for them, even if it is just for a few hours. I get to see that look on their face, the one I am sure I had just now at the eyepiece, night after night. It is a different kind of discovery." Suddenly, her phone buzzed in her pocket, a jarring, artificial sound in the quiet dome. She pulled it out. The screen read, "Ben Carter." "Excuse me for a second," she said to Liam, stepping away. "I have to take this." She answered the call. "Ben, is everything okay?" "Oh, you are supposed to be in bed." "I am in bed," came his groggy, congested voice from the phone. "And I am bored. Just wanted to see if the world had ended, or if the data from NGC 6611 was coming through clean." "The data is fine," she said, her voice dropping a little as she glanced over at Liam, who was politely looking away, giving her privacy. "We had a minor equipment issue, but it is resolved." "Equipment issue? What happened?" "Did you drop something again?" Ben teased. He knew her clumsy tendencies well. "It was just a loose connection," she said evasively. "It is fine now, Ben. Get some rest." All right, bossy," he grumbled good-naturedly. "Just checking in. Do not stay up all night. Remember what happened last time you tried a 36-hour observation run?" "I remember," she said with a small sigh. The memory involved a spilled cup of coffee and a nearly fried motherboard. "I am almost done here. Go to sleep." "Okay, Mum. Talk to you tomorrow." He coughed, then hung up. She slipped the phone back into her pocket. The brief, normal conversation had served as an anchor, pulling her back to her familiar reality. A reality where she was Dr. Vance, the focused, solitary scientist, and Ben was her only regular human interaction on the mountain. A reality where strange, interesting men who could fix spectroscopes with car batteries did not randomly appear and make her feel things. Liam turned back to her as she approached. "Everything okay?" "Yes. That was my colleague, Ben. He is out sick tonight." The diplomat, Liam guessed, a slight smile playing on his lips. Elara was surprised. How did you know? Just a hunch. You do not strike me as the person they send to deal with pesky tour guides. She could not argue with that. No, I am the person they send when the diplomat is unavailable, and someone needs to be sternly reminded of the rules. Well, for what it is worth, he said, his voice softening. I am glad he was sick tonight. His words hung in the space between them, simple, direct, and utterly disarming. The air crackled with an unspoken energy. He took a small step closer, and she did not move away. They were standing near the massive concrete pier that supported the telescope, shrouded in shadow, the faint starlight from the dome's opening dusting his shoulders. She could see the flecks of gold in his hazel eyes, the way his brow furrowed slightly when he was concentrating. He smelled faintly of the cold night air, of pine, and of the spicy hot chocolate he had brought her. It was a dizzying combination. I should let you get back to work, he said, though he made no move to leave. His gaze dropped to her lips for a fraction of a second, and her breath hitched. The work is done for tonight, she managed to say, her voice huskier than usual. The system will run its automated calibration sequence for the rest of the night. Good, he said softly. He was going to kiss her. She knew it with a sudden, gut-wrenching certainty. Her mind, the logical, scientific part of her brain, was screaming 1,000 warnings. This was impulsive. This was unpredictable. This was chaos. But the rest of her, the part she so often ignored, was leaning into it, yearning for it. But the moment passed. He seemed to catch himself, taking a small, almost imperceptible step back. The intensity broke. He cleared his throat and shoved his hands into his pockets. Well, it is a long drive back down the mountain, he said, his tone shifting back to something more casual, though a new warmth lingered in it. Thank you for this, Elara. Seriously. This was unforgettable. You are welcome, she said, a little disappointed, a little relieved. And thank you for the calibrator and the hot chocolate. Any time, he said. She walked him back down the spiral staircase and to the door of the control room. The awkwardness of a first goodbye settled between them. So, he said, pausing at the door, I run these tours every Friday and Saturday night, if the sky is clear. A busy schedule, she noted. It is. But I was thinking, maybe sometime when I am not working, I could show you some of my favorite spots in the valley. The ones for daytime observation. There is a family of bald eagles nesting by the lake. It was an invitation. A clear, unambiguous request to see her again. Away from the observatory. Away from their professional roles. In the daylight. The idea was terrifying and thrilling. I would like that, she heard herself say, the words feeling foreign and wonderful on her tongue. A slow, brilliant smile spread across Liam's face. Great. Can I get your number? She gave it to him, and he texted her his name so she would have his. The brief exchange of digits felt as significant as swapping encrypted data keys. "I will call you," he promised, and then he was gone, the thick door hissing shut behind him, leaving her alone once more in the quiet hum of her ordered world. But it was not the same. It was as if he had brought a new colour into her spectrum, a frequency she had never known existed. She walked over to her console and picked up the travel mug he had left behind. It was still warm. The following days were a study in stellar aberration, an astronomical phenomenon Elara understood intimately. It was the apparent shift in the position of celestial objects due to the motion of the observer. In this case, she was the observer, and her world had been set in motion by a force named Liam Caldwell. The protostar in the Eagle Nebula was exactly where it should be, but everything in Elara's own orbit felt displaced. She found herself checking her phone with an unnerving frequency, a habit she had always found ridiculous in others. She would be deep in a complex data set, her mind navigating the intricate dance of gravitational forces and spectral emissions, when the thought of him would intrude. Did he mean it? Will he actually call? The questions were rogue signals, noise in the clean data stream of her life, and they were infuriatingly persistent. On Sunday morning, Ben returned to the observatory, his cold reduced to a lingering cough and a slightly pathetic-sounding sniffle. He found Elara in the control room, staring at a screen of data with an intensity that, to the casual observer, was perfectly normal. But Ben was not a casual observer. He had been her academic partner, her colleague and her closest, and only, really, friend for the better part of a decade. He could read her like a spectral chart. "Morning," he said, his voice still thick. He poured himself a mug of coffee from the pot she had brewed. "How is Vera? Did she miss me?" "She is fine." "And no," Elara replied without looking away from the screen. "She is an inanimate object, Ben. She has no capacity for emotional attachment." Ben took a sip of coffee and leaned against the console next to her. "Right. And you are just a collection of carbon and water, but you would miss me if I got eaten by a bear on the way up the mountain. The statistical probability of a bear encounter on this road is—" "Not the point, Elara," he cut in, a knowing smile in his voice. He peered at her screen. "Anything interesting in the latest data dump?" "Standard deviations are within expected parameters. We have confirmed a significant presence of methane and ammonia in the protostellar disk." "Great. Fantastic. The universe is still chugging along as planned." He paused, still studying her. "You seem different." "I am not different," she said a little too quickly. "I am processing data. It is what I do." "No, it is not that," he mused, tapping a finger on his mug. "You are distracted. Your focus is usually a laser beam. Right now, it is more like a disco ball, bouncing all over the place." He leaned closer, squinting at her. "And you have been staring at the same data frame for 10 minutes. You already tagged that anomaly yesterday." "I saw the log." Elara's cheeks flushed. She felt like a star caught in a gravitational lens, her inner workings exposed and magnified. She clicked to a different screen, her movements stiff. "I was double-checking the calibration," she mumbled. "Uh-huh," Ben said, unconvinced. He was about to press her further when her phone, sitting face down on the console, vibrated with a soft buzz. Elara's hand shot out and snatched it up so fast she almost knocked over a stack of printouts. She turned away from him, ostensibly for privacy, but the move was so uncharacteristically dramatic it was basically a confession. Ben's eyebrows rose in silent, amused astonishment. Her heart was hammering against her ribs. It was a text from Liam. Hey, it is Liam from the mountain. I have not been arrested for practicing unlicensed electrical engineering, so I am counting the night as a win. Hope your star is behaving. A smile bloomed on her face before she could stop it. It was funny and charming, and it was real. He had texted. She stared at the words, her mind, which could calculate orbital mechanics in her sleep, suddenly short-circuiting. What was the correct response protocol? Behind her, Ben was trying, and failing, to stifle a laugh. So, is the calibration going well? She shot him a withering glare over her shoulder before turning back to her phone. She typed a reply, deleted it, and typed another. Her first draft was too formal. Her second was too eager. This was infinitely more complicated than quantum physics. Finally, she settled on a message she hoped struck a balance between professional courtesy and something else. The protostar is fine. Your repair work was adequate. She hit send and immediately regretted it. Adequate. It sounded like a performance review for a mediocre intern. What was wrong with her? Her phone buzzed again almost instantly. Adequate. I am wounded. I thought it was at least surprisingly effective. The winking emoji seemed to mock her stiffness. He was teasing her. He was trying to get through the firewall she so carefully maintained. And it was working. She found herself smiling again. A real, genuine smile. Before she could craft another stilted reply, her phone started ringing. His name flashed on the screen. Panic seized her. A phone call was a real-time interaction. There was no time to draft and delete. Are you going to answer that? Or are you hoping to communicate with it telepathically? Ben asked, thoroughly enjoying her discomfort. She glared at him one more time before hitting the green icon and holding the phone to her ear. Hello? Is this the desk of Dr. Vance, expert in all things cosmic and purveyor of faint praise? Liam's voice was a warm, low rumble on the other end of the line, and it sent a ridiculous shiver down her spine. This is she, Elara said, trying to sound nonchalant. She stood up and walked to the other side of the room, turning her back on Ben's curious gaze. I figured a phone call was safer. My texting is prone to typos, and I did not want you to think I was sending you cryptic messages from an alien civilization. A reasonable precaution, she said, her lips twitching into a smile. So, listen. I was calling to see if my offer to show you some non-celestial bodies still stands. Specifically the avian kind. The eagles are very active this time of year. Her heart did a little flip. Oh. Yes. The offer. I am free on Tuesday afternoon, if that works for you. I could pick you up around 1. We could grab a late lunch after. Tuesday. It was 2 days away. It was an actual date. In the daytime. With food. Her mind raced. What would she wear? What would they talk about? Elara, you still there? Yes. Sorry. Yes. Tuesday would be acceptable. She could practically hear his smile. Acceptable. You are killing me, Doc. Is that scientist speak for I would love to? It might be, she admitted, a soft laugh escaping her lips. It felt strange and wonderful to laugh like this, so freely. Great. I will pick you up at the base of the mountain road. No point in me driving all the way up just to drive you back down. That is logical, she said. I will see you then, Elara. See you then, Liam. She hung up the phone and stood there for a moment, her mind buzzing. She felt a giddy, terrifying thrill. She turned around to find Ben staring at her, a look of pure, unadulterated shock on his face. You have a date, he said, his voice a hoarse whisper. Elara Vance. My Elara Vance. You have a date with a human male. Do not be ridiculous, she said, walking back to her console and trying to regain her composure. It is an ornithological expedition. Ben just shook his head slowly, a wide grin spreading across his face. Whatever you want to call it, I have not seen you smile like that since we got the funding confirmation for the new spectrometer. Who is he? And so, she told him. She told him about the tour group, the flashlights, the broken calibrator, and Liam's impossible, ingenious repair. She left out the part about the almost kiss in the dome. Some data was for her eyes only. When she finished, Ben was silent for a long moment. A photographer who can solder microcircuitry in the dark with a battery pack, he finally said. Marry him. It is not funny, Ben. I am not joking. A man like that is a statistical anomaly. He is a unicorn. You cannot let him go. I am just going to see some eagles with him, she insisted, though her protest felt weak even to her own ears. The next 2 days passed in a blur of nervous anticipation. Elara tried to work, but her focus was shot. Every variable in every equation seemed to rearrange itself to spell his name. The real crisis came on Tuesday morning, when she stood in front of her small closet in her living quarters at the base of the observatory. Her wardrobe consisted of 3 categories: sensible work clothes, flannel shirts, dark sweaters, practical trousers, comfortable lounging clothes, mostly old university sweatshirts, and rugged outdoor gear, hiking boots, waterproof jackets. There was no category for date with a charming photographer who makes you feel like a teenager. She pulled out a grey sweater and held it up. She all prayed. It had a small, faint coffee stain near the cuff. She tossed it on the bed. She tried a plaid flannel shirt. It felt too much like a work uniform. After nearly 20 minutes of growing panic, she settled on her newest pair of dark jeans, a soft, forest green sweater that she had bought on a whim and rarely wore, and her cleanest pair of hiking boots. She looked in the mirror. She looked like herself. She was not sure if that was a good thing or a bad thing. At 1 o'clock, she was waiting at the designated spot at the bottom of the mountain road. She felt ridiculously exposed in the bright sunlight, like a nocturnal creature that had wandered out of its burrow. A dusty but well-maintained dark blue pickup truck pulled up, and Liam was behind the wheel. He leaned across the passenger seat and opened the door for her, a warm, easy smile on his face. He was wearing a simple grey t-shirt and jeans, and the sunlight brought out the gold flecks in his eyes. There she is. I was worried you might have calculated the probability of a good time and decided to stay in the lab. The calculations were inconclusive, she said, climbing into the truck. So I had to proceed with empirical observation. He laughed. a rich, genuine sound that made her stomach flutter. "I knew I liked you, Doc." The drive to the lake was comfortable. He handled the truck with an easy confidence, one hand on the wheel, the other resting on the open window. He asked her about her work, and this time he seemed to truly listen, asking intelligent questions about stellar evolution and the challenges of filtering out atmospheric distortion. In return, he told her about his photography, about the patience required to get the perfect shot, the way light changed with the seasons, the stories you could find in a landscape. He pulled the truck into a small, unpaved lot near the edge of a vast, sparkling lake. The air was warmer down here in the valley, thick with the smell of damp earth and pine. "The nest is just a short walk from here," he said, grabbing a sleek black spotting scope and a tripod from the back of the truck. They walked along a narrow path that hugged the shoreline. It was peaceful, the only sounds the lapping of the water and the distant cry of a bird. Liam walked with a long, easy stride, pointing out different types of trees and plants. He was as fluent in the language of the forest as she was in the language of the cosmos. He stopped at a small clearing that overlooked the water, high in the branches of a massive, ancient pine tree. On the opposite side of a small inlet was a huge, chaotic tangle of sticks. The eagle's nest. "There," Liam said softly, setting up the scope with practiced efficiency. "They have used this same nest for 3 years, added to it every season. It must weigh a ton." He peered through the eyepiece, making a fine adjustment. "Okay. Take a look. I think one of them is home." Elara leaned forward and looked. The scope brought the nest into sharp, stunning focus. A magnificent bald eagle was perched on the edge, its white head a stark contrast to its dark body. Its yellow eye was fierce, its gaze sweeping over the lake with a regal intensity. "It is beautiful," Elara breathed. "She is the female," Liam said, his voice a low murmur beside her. "The male is probably out hunting. He is slightly smaller, but just as impressive." They took turns at the scope, watching the eagle preen her feathers. The shared silence was comfortable, easy. "It is not so different, is it?" Elara mused, looking out over the water. "What we do." "How so?" "All this patient observation," she explained. "You watching these birds, me watching a star. We are both just trying to understand something by looking at it from a great distance." He considered that for a moment. "I guess so. But my subject has the potential to fly away at any moment. Yours is a little more reliable." The comment hit closer to home than he could have known. "That is why I chose it," she said, her voice quieter than she intended. "Stars are predictable. Their behavior is governed by immutable laws of physics. They do not change their minds. They do not lie." Liam was quiet for a moment. He was not looking at the eagle anymore. He was looking at her, his expression soft and understanding. He had heard what she had not said. "People are messy," he said gently. "It is true. But the laws that govern them, love, loyalty, kindness, they are worth studying too. Even if the results are not as predictable." Just then, a cry echoed across the lake. The other eagle appeared, soaring in from the west. It flew with a power and grace that was breathtaking, its wingspan immense against the blue sky. It circled the nest once before landing neatly beside its mate, a fish clutched in its talons. Elara and Liam watched, captivated by the raw, natural beauty of the scene. In that shared moment of wonder, he reached out and took her hand. His fingers were warm and strong, and they wrapped around hers in a way that felt both new and completely natural. Her first instinct, the ingrained reflex to pull away from contact, flared up, but she suppressed it. She laced her fingers through his. His hand gave hers a gentle squeeze. It was not a passionate, desperate gesture. It was simple. It was grounding, a quiet acknowledgement of the connection that was growing between them, as real and tangible as the ancient pine that held the eagle's nest. For the first time in a very long time, Elara Vance felt the chaotic, unpredictable pull of another human being, and she did not want to look away. The simple act of holding hands felt like a complex equation to Elara, one with variables she had never encountered. There was the warmth of Liam's skin against hers, a steady, living heat that was nothing like the passive warmth of a heated mug. There was the texture of his calluses, a testament to a life lived in the physical world, a world of ropes and lenses and tools. And there was the gentle, secure pressure of his fingers intertwined with hers, a signal of connection so clear and strong it momentarily overwhelmed all her other senses. She did not pull away. As they walked back along the path toward the truck, the silence that fell between them was no longer the empty, sterile silence of the observatory dome, but a rich, generative quiet, filled with the unspoken acknowledgement that a boundary had been crossed. For Elara, who had built her life around carefully constructed boundaries, the feeling was both terrifying and exhilarating. It was like discovering a new law of physics. He opened the truck door for her, only letting go of her hand at the last possible second. As she slid into the passenger seat, she could still feel the phantom sensation of his touch. The drive away from the lake was different from the drive there. The space inside the cab of the truck seemed smaller, more charged. Elara found herself acutely aware of his presence beside her, the way his hand rested on the gear shift, the faint scent of pine and lake water that clung to him. "So," Liam said, his eyes on the road but his attention clearly on her. "Lunch. I hope you are hungry. Maria's burgers are legendary, and I am pretty sure skipping them is a misdemeanor in this county." "I could eat," she admitted, surprised to find that she was, in fact, ravenous. Nerves and adrenaline had a way of burning through her energy reserves. "Is this the same Maria of the miraculous hot chocolate?" "The one and only," he confirmed with a grin. "She is the unofficial heart of this town. She knows everything about everyone, so be prepared." He was not exaggerating. The diner was a small, bustling place, with red vinyl booths and a long formica countertop. The air was thick with the delicious, comforting smells of coffee, frying onions, and baking pie. A woman with a warm, wrinkled face and a cloud of white hair tied back in a bandana looked up as they entered, a wide smile spreading across her face. "Liam Caldwell, as I live and breathe. I was about to send a search party. You missed breakfast." Her voice was raspy and full of affection. "I was engaged in important scientific research, Maria," Liam said, sliding into a booth and gesturing for Elara to sit opposite him. "This is Dr. Elara Vance. And Elara, this is the legendary Maria." "A doctor, huh?" Maria said, her sharp eyes giving Elara a quick but thorough once-over. She did not look impressed or intimidated, merely curious. "What is wrong with him? Is it serious?" Elara blinked, momentarily confused. Liam let out a hearty laugh. She is an astronomer, Maria. A star doctor. Oh. Maria's face broke into another grin. Well, that is much better. I was worried for a second. Welcome, honey. Any friend of Liam's is a friend of mine. The special is meatloaf. But you two look like you need burgers. 2 Ridge Runner burgers, one with extra pickles, one without. I remember. She winked at Liam and bustled off toward the kitchen without waiting for their order. Elara looked at Liam, her eyebrows raised. She is efficient. I told you, he said, looking completely at ease. Heart of the town. It was so different from her world. Her interactions were scheduled, professional, and almost always transactional. This easy, familiar rapport with a near stranger was a foreign concept. She watched as Liam waved to a man in a flannel shirt at the counter and nodded to a family in the next booth. He was not just a resident here. He was a part of the fabric of the place. He was grounded and connected to this small community in a way she had never been connected to anywhere. Their burgers arrived, massive and delicious looking, along with 2 tall glasses of iced tea. For a few minutes they ate in a comfortable silence, the simple and satisfying act of eating a good meal a shared pleasure. So, Liam said finally, after polishing off half his burger, you never really told me why. The stars. Elara finished chewing a bite of her own burger, which was, as promised, legendary. She took a sip of iced tea, stalling for a moment. It was not a question she got often, and the real answer was more complicated than most people had the patience for. I grew up in the suburbs of a big city, she began slowly, looking down at her plate. There was so much light, you could barely see a handful of stars on a clear night. But my grandfather, he had this old, dusty telescope in his attic. It was not very powerful, but on the rare occasions we would visit my grandparents in the countryside, he would take it out. She could picture it so clearly. The cool night air, the chirping of crickets, the smell of her grandfather's pipe tobacco. He would show me Jupiter and its moons, just tiny little pinpricks of light, but he would tell me they were worlds, just as real as our own. He showed me Saturn's rings, the Orion Nebula. It was like he was showing me a secret universe that was hidden in plain sight. It was quiet. It was beautiful, and it all made sense. She looked up and met Liam's gaze. His expression was open, attentive. It was the only thing that really did. What do you mean? He asked gently. She sighed, a small, quiet breath. My family. They are good people, loud people. My parents, my brother, my sister. They are all in sales. Very successful, very competitive. Everything was a negotiation, a performance. Our house was always full of noise, people talking over each other, and I was quiet. I liked books. I liked being alone. They did not really get it. They thought there was something wrong with me that needed fixing. The old familiar ache was still there, a faint echo from her childhood. They loved me, I know they did, but I always felt like a problem they were trying to solve. When I looked through that telescope, none of that mattered. The universe did not care if I was quiet or loud, popular or a loner. It just was. It operated on principles of logic and mathematics. It was the most profound sense of peace I had ever felt. I guess I have been chasing that feeling ever since. She trailed off, a little embarrassed by how much she had revealed. She was not used to being so candid about her past. Liam was quiet for a long moment, just watching her. He reached across the table and lightly touched the back of her hand. A brief, reassuring gesture. "There is nothing wrong with you that needs fixing, Elara." His words were so simple, so direct, and they landed in her heart with the force of a revelation. Her throat felt tight. "To feel at home in the universe," he continued softly. "That is not an escape. That is a gift." He withdrew his hand, but the warmth lingered. "For what it is worth, my family thought I was crazy too." "They did?" "Oh yeah," he said with a wry smile. "My dad is a corporate lawyer. My mum is a financial planner. They are very practical, very successful people who live on the 45th floor of a building in the city. When I told them I was quitting my job to move to a tiny town in the mountains to take pictures of the sky, you would have thought I had told them I was joining the circus. What was your job?" "I was a lead engineer for a tech company," he said, surprising her. "I was designing camera sensors, actually. It paid incredibly well, and it was slowly draining the life out of me. I spent my days in a clean room under fluorescent lights, arguing about pixel density and sensor noise, and I would go home to an apartment where I did not even know my neighbors' names. One day I realized I was spending all my time designing the tools to see the world, but I was not actually seeing it myself." He leaned back in the booth, a reminiscent look on his face. "So I cashed out my stock options, bought my truck, and drove until the city lights were just a bad memory in my rearview mirror. I have not regretted it for a second." Elara looked at him, really looked at him, and saw him in a new light. He was not just a charming guide. He was someone who had made a conscious, difficult choice to pursue a life of meaning over a life of convention. He had traded a world of predictable success for one of unpredictable wonder. He had chosen the messiness of life over the sterile order of a tech lab. In a way, his journey was the mirror image of her own. They finished their lunch, the conversation flowing easily now, touching on everything from their favorite books to their shared frustration with software updates. When Maria brought the check, she gave Elara a long, appraising look, which then turned into a warm, genuine smile. "You come back soon, Doctor," she said. "This one needs a keeper." On the drive back to the base of the mountain, the comfortable quiet returned, but now it was layered with a new depth of understanding. They had shared pieces of their past, the quiet, formative moments that had shaped them into the people they were. The car felt like a small, private world, insulated from everything else. Liam pulled the truck to a stop at the same spot where he had picked her up. He did not cut the engine. He just shifted into park and turned in his seat to face her. The afternoon sun streamed through the windshield, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air and catching the gold in his eyes. "I had a really nice time today, Elara," he said, his voice low and sincere. "Me too," she replied, and it was the truest thing she had said all day. "Thank you for showing me the eagles. Any time," he said. The space between them crackled with unspoken energy. The memory of the almost kiss in the dome hung in the air. This time, there was no massive telescope, no pressing work to be done. There was just the two of them. the quiet hum of the engine and the afternoon light. He did not move. He just watched her, his gaze soft and questioning. Elara, who had spent her entire adult life observing, analyzing, and waiting, realized it was her turn to act. It was her turn to close the distance. Slowly, deliberately, she leaned across the space between the seats. She saw his eyes widen slightly in surprise and then soften as he realized what she was doing. He met her halfway. His lips were warm and soft, and the kiss was nothing like the chaotic supernova-sized explosions she read about in books. It was gentle. It was tentative at first, a question asked and answered. It tasted faintly of iced tea and a shared lunch. She lifted a hand and rested it on his jaw, feeling the slight roughness of his 5 o'clock shadow under her fingertips. He made a soft sound in the back of his throat and deepened the kiss, his hand coming up to cup the back of her neck, his fingers tangling gently in her hair. It was a discovery, a signal emerging from the noise of her life, clear and undeniable and beautiful. It was a feeling of rightness, of a piece of a puzzle she did not even know she was solving, clicking perfectly into place. It was connection, pure and simple. When they finally broke apart, they were both slightly breathless. Elara rested her forehead against his, her eyes closed. "Wow," he whispered, his voice a little shaky. "Yes," she agreed. It was the only word she could think of. She could have stayed there forever, in the warm, safe bubble of his truck. But the sun was getting lower, casting long shadows across the road. The mountain was waiting. Her work was waiting. She straightened up, a reluctant smile on her face. "I should go." "I know," he said, his thumb gently stroking her neck. He looked disappointed, but he understood. "Big night of stargazing ahead." "Something like that," she said. "I have to finalize the first draft of a major grant proposal. It is for a 5-year survey of exoplanetary atmospheres. The deadline is in 2 weeks. It is a lot of work." Liam's smile tightened just a fraction, a subtle shift she almost did not notice. 5 years. Wow. That is some serious long-term planning. "It is how deep sky astronomy works," she explained. "Everything is on a long time scale." "Right," he said, nodding. He let his hand drop from her neck, and the loss of his touch was immediate and acute. "I barely plan 5 weeks ahead. I just kind of follow the light." It was not a criticism. It was just a statement of fact. But it hung in the air between them, a reminder of the different orbits they travelled in. He lived his life in seasons, in moments captured by a camera shutter. She lived hers in multi-year funding cycles and the slow, inexorable crawl of celestial mechanics. "I will call you," he said, his smile returning, though it did not quite reach his eyes this time. "Okay," she said. She got out of the truck and watched as he drove away, a plume of dust rising in his wake. She touched her lips, the memory of the kiss still tingling. She had found a signal, a beautiful, powerful signal. But as she started her own car to drive up the lonely mountain road, a new and unsettling question began to form in her mind. In the grand long-term survey of her life, was a man who followed the light just a beautiful transient bit of noise, Or was he a signal strong enough to change the entire course of her research? The 2 weeks that followed their first kiss were for Elara like observing the universe through a new, more powerful lens. The world, which had always been a collection of observable data points and predictable patterns, was suddenly infused with vibrant, chaotic, and beautiful new colours. Her life, once a solitary orbit, had been captured by the gravity of another. They were inseparable. Liam would often drive up the mountain in the late afternoons, bringing with him a thermos of Maria's coffee and a quiet, comforting presence that filled the sterile control room with warmth. He would sit for hours, working on his laptop editing photos, while she worked on her grant proposal. He never interrupted, never demanded her attention, but his being there was a steady anchor in the sea of her concentration. She found that she worked better with him nearby, the low hum of the observatory machinery harmonizing with the soft clicks of his keyboard. Sometimes she would drive down into the valley. He lived in a small, rustic cabin he had renovated himself, nestled in a grove of aspen trees. The interior was simple and functional, dominated by a large stone fireplace, shelves overflowing with books, and stunning large-format prints of his photography on the walls. It smelled of wood smoke, coffee, and drying pine needles. It smelled like him. He taught her how to see the world through his eyes. He showed her the way the evening light, the golden hour, could transform a mundane field of grass into a masterpiece of light and shadow. He let her use his expensive cameras, showing her how to adjust the aperture and shutter speed, explaining the delicate dance between light and time. She, in turn, showed him her universe. On one particularly clear night at his cabin, far from the residual glow of the valley towns, she pointed out the Andromeda Galaxy, a faint, fuzzy patch of light to the naked eye. Every star you can see in the sky is in our galaxy, the Milky Way, she explained, her voice soft in the cool night air. But that smudge, that is another galaxy, 2.5 million light-years away. It contains 1 trillion stars. You are looking at 1 trillion suns, 1 trillion chances for worlds like ours. He did not say anything. He just wrapped his arm around her, pulling her close, and they stood there together. 2 infinitesimally small people looking out at an impossibly large universe. And for the first time in her life, Elara did not feel small at all. She felt anchored. She felt seen. It was her relationship with Liam, she realized, that was breaking the grant proposal wide open. He had unlocked a part of her she had not known existed, a more poetic, more passionate part. She found herself writing not just with scientific precision, but with a newfound sense of wonder, the same wonder she saw in his eyes when he looked at the sky. The proposal became more than a request for funding. It became a testament to the profound, soul-stirring beauty of the cosmos. She was putting the finishing touches on the final section one afternoon when Ben burst into the control room, his face flushed with an excitement she had not seen on him since they had first detected the spectral signature of complex organic molecules in a meteorite fragment years ago. He was waving a printout like a victory flag. "You will not believe this," he said, his voice a breathless rush. "I just got off a video call with Dr. Aris Thorne from the European Southern Observatory." Elara's head snapped up. Dr. Thorne was a titan in their field, the head of the committee that awarded the most prestigious grants in astrophysics. "What? Why? Is it about the proposal?" "The deadline is not for another week. Forget the proposal. This is bigger than the proposal." Ben slammed the paper down on her console. It was an email forwarded from the university dean. The lead position for the Atacama Celestial Survey in Chile. "Dr. Peterson has had to withdraw for health reasons. They are fast-tracking a replacement." Thorne's committee reviewed the top 10 grant proposals currently under consideration to create a short list of candidates to take over the project. Elara, you are on the list. You are one of 3 finalists. Elara stared at the email, the words blurring together. The Atacama Celestial Survey. It was not just a project. It was the project. A 5-year fully funded survey using the most advanced telescope array on the planet, located in the driest, clearest skies on Earth. Leading it was the kind of career-defining opportunity that came along once in a generation. It was a Nobel Prize track position. It was everything she had ever worked for, the ultimate validation of her life's devotion to the stars. "They want to interview you," Ben was saying, pacing back and forth. "Tomorrow morning. They're making a final decision by the end of the week." Thorne said your proposal was. He said it was breathtaking. He said it read less like a scientific document and more like a love letter to the universe. A dizzying, euphoric wave washed over her. She had done it. Her work, her passion, it was all culminating in this single, perfect moment. A love letter to the universe. The phrase echoed in her mind, and she thought of Liam, of his hand in hers, of the way he had looked at her when she had shown him Andromeda. He had helped her write it. He had helped her find the words. "I have to tell him," she said. Her voice distant as she stood up, her mind already racing. "I have to go tell Liam." "Right, Liam." Ben's ecstatic expression faltered for a fraction of a second, a flicker of concern crossing his face. "Yeah, you do that." The drive down the mountain was a blur. Her mind was a supernova of excitement and frantic planning. Chile, for 5 years. It was a huge logistical challenge, but they could make it work. They had to. He could visit. She could come back during the off-seasons. He could take photographs of the Andes, the southern sky. The possibilities were endless. Their love was not confined to this one valley. It was as boundless as the universe she studied. She was so sure of it. She pulled up to his cabin just as dusk was settling, painting the sky in strokes of orange and violet. Smoke was curling from the stone chimney, and the warm light from his windows spilled out onto the porch. He opened the door before she even knocked, a wide, happy smile on his face. "I was just about to call you," he said, pulling her into a hug. "I was thinking about you, and then your car appeared. It is like you are psychic." He kissed her. A deep, lingering kiss that tasted of the wood smoke in the air. "I am making that stew you like. Come in. You are just in time." He led her inside. The cabin was warm and smelled incredible. A pot was simmering on the stove, and a bottle of red wine was open on the counter. He was creating a home for them, a life. The sight of it, the sheer domestic comfort of it, sent a small, sharp pang through her chest, a feeling she quickly pushed aside. "I have news," she said, her voice vibrating with barely contained energy. "The most incredible news." He turned from the stove, his smile still in place, his eyes full of warmth. "Good news. Did you finish the grant?" "Better," she said, taking both of his hands in hers. "Liam, I am a finalist to lead the Atacama Celestial Survey." His smile remained, but it became fixed, the light in his eyes dimming slightly as he processed her words. "The Atacama, in Chile." "Yes. Can you believe it?" It is the opportunity of a lifetime. It is a 5-year project. 5 years, Liam, with the best equipment in the world. The things I could discover, the data we could gather. She was rambling, the words tumbling out in a rush of excitement. He slowly pulled his hands from hers. He took a step back, leaning against the counter. Her smile was gone now, replaced by a look of profound, quiet shock. 5 years. He said the words as if they were in a foreign language he was struggling to translate. I know it is a long time, she said quickly, sensing the shift in the atmosphere. The warmth in the room suddenly felt suffocating. But we can make it work. You can come visit. I can fly back. It will be an adventure. An adventure, he repeated, his voice flat. He was not looking at her anymore. He was staring at the pot of stew simmering on the stove, as if he could see their shared future evaporating in the steam. You would be in Chile, and I would be here. For a little while, yes. But we would see each other, she insisted, a frantic edge creeping into her voice. Why did not he see how wonderful this was? It is not an ending, Liam. It is a new chapter. He finally looked at her, and the expression in his eyes stopped her cold. It was a look of deep, bottomless hurt. It was the look of a man watching something he cherished turn to dust in his hands. A new chapter for you, he said, his voice dangerously quiet. What about my chapter? The one I thought we were writing together. Here, the one with the cabin, and the eagles, and Maria's burgers. Was that just the prologue to you leaving? No, that's not what this is, she cried, taking a step toward him. This is my work. It is my life. I thought you understood that. I do understand it, he said, and now there was a bitter edge to his voice. I understand it perfectly. Your life is there. He gestured vaguely upward, toward the ceiling, toward the sky. It is a long-term plan, a 5-year survey. It has always been about the next data point, the next discovery. I was just, what was I, Elara? A temporary distraction, some local colour while you were waiting for your real life to start. How can you say that? She whispered, her heart fracturing. You know that is not true. I love you. The words, the first time she had said them aloud, hung in the air between them, beautiful and tragic. He closed his eyes for a moment, a muscle working in his jaw. When he opened them, they were filled with a profound sadness. I love you too. God help me, I do. That is why this hurts so much. I left a world of 5-year plans, Elara. I ran from it. I built a life here, in the now. A life of moments. I really thought you were starting to see the beauty in that, but you were not seeing it. You were just using it as inspiration for your next proposal. That is cruel, she said, tears welling in her eyes. And it is not fair. You are asking me to choose between my entire life's work and you. No, he said, shaking his head. I am not. You have already chosen. You chose a long time ago, before you ever met me. You chose the stars. He let out a harsh, broken laugh. How can I possibly compete with 1 trillion of them? The silence that followed was absolute, a black hole that swallowed all the warmth and light in the room. The stew bubbled softly on the stove, a mocking reminder of a future that would never happen. They were standing on opposite sides of a canyon, a chasm of ambition and philosophy that was too wide to cross. He saw a man who wanted a life. She saw a woman who wanted a universe. "I have an interview in the morning," she said, her voice a hollow shell of what it had been. "I know you do," he said softly. "You should go. You will be brilliant." There was nothing else to say. Every word was a potential new wound. She turned and walked to the door, her movements stiff and robotic. She did not look back. If she looked back, she would shatter. She opened the door and stepped out into the cold night air. The first stars were just beginning to appear in the twilight sky, cold and distant and impossibly far away. They were no longer a source of comfort or wonder. They were a reminder of what she had just lost. The love letter she had written to the universe had been accepted, and the price, it seemed, was everything. This is a tale of two hearts finding their way back to a love that changed everything. The drive back up the mountain was the longest, loneliest journey of Elara's life. Each turn in the road was a twist of the knife in her chest. The familiar constellations began to wheel into view through her windshield, but for the first time, they offered no comfort. They were no longer a map of the cosmos, but a chart of her own failure. They were cold, indifferent, and infinitely far away, just like her future now felt. She spent the night in the sterile quiet of the control room, the ghost of Liam's presence in the empty chair beside her. She did not sleep. She just stared at the screens, the streams of data and telemetry washing over her unseeing eyes. The numbers and symbols, once the language of her soul, were now just noise. The signal, the one clear, beautiful signal in the chaos of her life, was gone. The video call for the interview was scheduled for 9 in the morning. She showered, put on a clean dark sweater, and stared at her reflection in the small bathroom mirror. Her eyes were shadowed, her face pale. She looked like a ghost haunting the scene of her own life. She sat down at the console, logged into the call, and a moment later, the faces of Dr. Aris Thorne and 2 other senior astronomers from the committee appeared on her screen. "Dr. Vance, thank you for making the time," Dr. Thorne said, his voice a crisp, professional baritone. "We were all extraordinarily impressed with your proposal. Truly, the passion for the subject is palpable." "Thank you, sir," Elara said, her own voice sounding thin and distant to her ears. They began the interview, asking a series of highly technical questions about her methodology, her data processing models, and her long-term objectives. The answers came easily, automatically. This was her native language. The part of her brain that could calculate spectral shifts and model gravitational lensing was perfectly intact, running on a kind of autopilot that had been programmed by years of relentless study. She was brilliant. She was precise. She was hollow. Then, Dr. Thorne leaned forward slightly, his expression shifting from professional curiosity to something more probing, more human. "Dr. Vance," he said, "there is one final question. It is not about the data. We have dozens of qualified candidates who can interpret data. Your proposal stood out because of its heart. So, I will ask you plainly, why this project? Why is it so important for us, for humanity, to spend this much time and effort looking for the atmospheres of worlds we can never possibly visit?" The question landed, and for a moment, Elara had no answer. The technical, pre-packaged response she had prepared died on her lips. It felt like a lie. Instead, her mind was filled with the image of Liam, standing by the lake, the afternoon sun in his... She thought of him showing her how to see the beauty in a single beam of light, and of her showing him the majesty of 1,000,000,000,000 suns. When she spoke, the words came from a place she had not known existed until 2 weeks ago. Because, she began, her voice gaining a strength and clarity that surprised her. For all of our history, we have looked up at the sky and felt alone. We search for patterns, for order, for a sign that we are not just a cosmic accident. This project, it is not just about finding oxygen or methane. It is about connection. It is about looking out into an infinite, silent universe and seeing the possibility of a neighbor. It is about finding the empirical proof that wonder, that life, that a home can exist in more than one place. She took a breath, her gaze becoming more intense. We spend our lives looking for signals in the noise, a sign that we are seen, that we matter. Finding a world with an atmosphere like our own, millions of light years away, does not just tell us about them. It tells us about us. It validates the deepest, most human hope we have, that we are not, and have never been, truly alone. She finished, her heart pounding. The answer was raw, emotional, and deeply personal. It was the truth. It was the love letter she had written. The committee members were silent for a long moment, their faces unreadable. Dr. Thorne was the first to speak. "Thank you, Doctor," he said softly, a flicker of something like awe in his eyes. That was a remarkable answer. "We will be in touch within 24 hours. The screen went blank. Elara sat back in her chair, the adrenaline draining away, leaving her utterly empty. She had just given the performance of her life. She had articulated the very soul of her work. She knew, with a certainty that chilled her to the bone, that it meant nothing. She had spoken of the profound human need for connection, while methodically severing the most important connection she had ever made. She had waxed poetic about finding a home in the universe when she had just walked away from the only place that had ever felt like one. The hypocrisy of it was a physical weight, pressing down on her, making it hard to breathe. She turned to her monitor, pulling up the final draft of her grant proposal. She read the title page, the abstract, the introduction. Ben was right. It was a beautiful piece of writing. But as she read the words, she no longer saw her own work. She saw Liam. He was in every line about wonder, every sentence about seeing the world in a new light. He was the signal. Without him, the rest was just elegant, meaningless noise. An hour later, her phone rang. It was Dr. Thorne's assistant. They were offering her the position, the lead directorship of the Atacama Celestial Survey. Her dream, her life's work, realized. "Thank you," she said, her voice a dead calm. "I am incredibly honored. Can you give me an hour to consider?" "Of course, Doctor," the assistant replied, sounding surprised she even had to ask. Elara hung up the phone. She stood up and walked to the large window of the control room that overlooked the valley. The sun was high and bright. Down there, somewhere among the trees, Liam was living in the now. She was up here, living in a future that had suddenly become unbearable. She had chosen the stars. She had been wrong. Her choice had not been between her work and Liam. It had been between two versions of herself. The one who observed life from a safe, sterile distance, and the one who was brave enough to live it. With a clarity that was absolute, she knew what she had to do. She walked back to her desk and typed out a short, polite email to Dr. Thorne, thanking him for the extraordinary offer and respectfully declining the directorship in Chile. She explained that unforeseen personal circumstances required her to remain where she was. Then, she opened her grant proposal, and with a few swift keystrokes, she added a new section. A proposal for a new, semi-independent research initiative, to be based at Starlight Ridge, focused on analyzing the Atacama data remotely and developing new community outreach programs. A plan that kept her here. A plan that was grounded. She hit send before she could lose her nerve. Then, without a second thought, she grabbed her car keys and ran. She drove down the mountain like a madwoman, her heart a frantic drum against her ribs. The tires screeched around the familiar turns. She did not know what she would say. She did not know if he would even listen. But she knew she had to try. She had to close the distance. She pulled up to his cabin. The engine barely stopped before she was out of the car. His truck was there. She ran to the door, her breath catching in her throat, and saw him. He was on the porch, sitting on the top step, his camera lying forgotten beside him. He was just staring out at the trees, his shoulders slumped, his face a mask of loss. He looked up as she approached, his eyes wide with surprise and a deep, weary sadness. "Elara," he said, his voice raspy. "I was wrong," she said, the words spilling out of her in a desperate, breathless rush. She stopped a few feet from him, her hands clenched at her sides. "I was so wrong. I came here and I told you that you had to choose between me and a trillion stars. But that was never the choice. The choice was between a universe that was cold and empty and theoretical and a universe that was warm and real and had you in it." Tears were streaming down her face now, but she did not care. "I love my work. I will always love the stars. But it is not a love letter to the universe if you are not there to read it with me. It is just a research paper. You are not a distraction from my life, Liam. You are my life. The most beautiful, unpredictable, wonderful part of it." He just stared at her, his expression unreadable, and her heart plummeted. "Maybe it was too late. I turned it down," she whispered. "The job in Chile. I turned it down." That was what broke through his shock. He stood up slowly, his eyes searching hers, looking for the truth. "What, Elara? No, you cannot. That is your dream." "It was," she said, taking a step closer, her voice shaking but certain. "It was my dream. But then I met you, and I started having better dreams. Dreams about eagles, and lazy afternoons, and watching the sky from a porch with someone I love. I do not want to be in Chile for 5 years. I want to be here, with you for a lifetime. We can figure out the rest. We can make a new plan, a new map, together." He closed the distance between them in 2 long strides. He framed her face with his hands, his thumbs gently wiping away her tears. He looked into her eyes, and she saw all of his hurt, all of his love, and then a dawning, brilliant hope. "Are you sure?" he breathed. I have never been more certain of anything in my entire life, she said. And then he kissed her. It was not a gentle, tentative kiss like their first. It was a kiss of homecoming. A desperate, profound, soul-deep kiss that healed every fracture in her heart. He held her as if he would never let her go, and she wrapped her arms around his neck, anchoring herself to him, her true north, her center of gravity. When they finally broke apart, they rested their foreheads together, breathing the same air, their worlds, finally, perfectly aligned. I love you, he said, his voice thick with emotion. I love you so much. I love you, she replied, a laugh bubbling up through her tears. And I promise, my long-term planning from now on will always, always include you. That evening, they sat together on his porch as the stars came out, a blanket wrapped around their shoulders, a shared mug of coffee warming their hands. She told him about her new proposal, her idea to build something right here. He listened, his eyes alight with pride, and began brainstorming ways he could help, how his photography could be part of the outreach, and how they could build it together. She had spent her whole life looking up and searching for distant worlds. But now, with his arm wrapped securely around her, his head resting against hers, she finally understood. The universe was not something to be observed from a distance. It was something to be lived in. She had found her home, not in the cold, faraway light of a trillion stars, but in the warm, steady presence of the man beside her, under a sky that was finally, perfectly, close enough to touch.